change, as we all know, is recognized as the multiplier of threats with environmental degradation and impacts, increasing the security threats, conflicts, political instability and displacement. And exactly here we have to talk about women and girls' perspective, because they are, of course, affected by climate insecurity and climate injustice. And that's what we are now focusing on, understanding these gender dimensions, really putting the topic on COP28 of climate-related security risks when we come from a feminist perspective, and of course uncovering new solutions, new finance mechanisms, new ideas. And that's why we have later on a panel with local perspectives, because one thing is to talk about all the stages about that topic, the other thing is really to listen to solutions, really to listen to those voices affected. It's a critical moment to showcase that, how climate security efforts and the women, peace and security agenda can be, of course, mutually reinforcing, and that's why we gathered today. So again, thank you for your time, thank you for putting us in your busy schedule. I know the days are crazily packed, it's great to have you, and I'm also looking forward to your questions, of course. So whatever burns on your chest, in your heart, when it comes to that topic, I know we're all passionate, but please, it's not a one-way situation here, it's a two-way conversation. So please come in with your questions. And also there's another thing, just to give you a little bit of a navigation, as I'm a geographer, I love navigations. You have different languages today on the panel. So we will speak, of course, in English, but also the panelists will speak French and Spanish. So if you need translation, please feel free to grab a translation device. The translation is covered here, so just that you are within our conversation. My name is Katie Gallas. I'm very pleased to be your host for the day, and I would say with that we start into our session. And for the opening keynote, I welcome now our first speaker. He's the Deputy Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the Foreign Office of Germany. He acts as a Director for International Climate Policy at the Federal Foreign Office. And in his role, he oversees, and he's now very busy, of course, in these COP times, dealing with the international climate action, the UNFCCC, climate finance is on his desk, bilateral climate cooperation, climate insecurity, and international environment policy. So please give him a round of applause. Norbert Gorrissen is with us.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, partners. The climate crisis particularly affects vulnerable countries and communities. Climate vulnerability is experienced especially in conflict and crisis settings, and also for people who are marginalized on the basis of gender identity, origin, disability, and other attributes, often in multiple ways. Our climate foreign policies aims to contribute for keeping 1.5 in reach, to foster climate partnerships, climate finance, and to prevent the geopolitical and security impacts of climate change. Our feminist foreign policy seeks to achieve gender equality and promote diversity worldwide. It seeks to guarantee that all people have equal rights and representation. It seeks to ensure that everyone has equal access to resources. We see women leaders as agents of change, dealing with the climate crisis on a daily basis and fostering peace in their communities, in their countries worldwide. It's time to bring these two agendas, the climate foreign policy and the feminist foreign policy, together. We have been a strong supporter for the United Nations Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund for several years, for example in Sudan, DRC, Myanmar. The fund represents an excellent example on how to empower women's organizations that work at the forefront of peace, security and humanitarian action and truly make a difference in conflict and crisis settings. The fund and its community of women leaders have identified the need to tackle challenges for climate and peace at the same time, and that's why we are thrilled to announce the new Women Climate Security Funding Initiative in this fund. We are happy to contribute seed funding of about €3 million to provide support for grassroots and local women's organizations and communities at the forefront of preventing and responding to climate-related conflicts. As has been said, today here in Dubai is the Day for Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace. That's the theme set up by the UN, the COP28 presidency. And we are very proud to announce that this new Women and Climate and Security Funding Initiative is our contribution to that, and that we, of course, support the Declaration for Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace. So we welcome other partners also to join. Initial projects of this new initiatives will be realized in Colombia, Nigeria and the Pacific, in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, to combine peacekeeping and climate action and increase women's leadership. We are very glad that Slovenia joined this initiative and that my colleague Smiljana is here today. The new initiative is important to us because it enables concrete local action with and through communities led by women and climate society organizations. There's a high demand making funding accessible direct to communities. Second, it also contributes to the network of feminist leaders. We are impressed to see that organizations that have received funding in the past use this as an opportunity to build long-lasting connections and partnerships. And third, it offers an avenue for learning also for other funding instruments. The big question is how to make funding available in climate and risk settings. And other climate funding arrangements tend not to go in these areas, and I think what this fund is doing, and this initiative is doing, could really provide assistance for other funds to go in this direction. The climate community may be eager to learn from that. Today, we want to give space to women and community leaders here in this event to share their first-hand experiences regarding the challenges they face, but foremost to learn about their solutions, their good practices and their leadership. We want to learn from activism and academia. This is only the beginning. We invite others to join the initiative, and I hope, Smiljana, you help us to get others on board and to hope to drive this partnership and community of practice over the next years. We thank the Pavilion team and KTU for allowing to make this event happen here today, and for the speakers present here today to speak up. Thank you all for being here, for Sarah Hendricks, Deputy Executive Director for Policy Programs, Civil Society and Intergovernmental Support at UN Women, for opening this event with me, and I wish you all a fruitful and successful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Norbert Goresen. You were already mentioned. Sarah Hendricks is also with us, ladies and gentlemen. She's from the UN Women. She's the Deputy Executive Director for Policy Programs, Civil Society and Intergovernmental Support. And she brings really more than 2 decades of experience working across multi-stakeholder partners, which is not always easy, as we all know, including, of course, with government, public sector, foundations, NGOs, and research institutions. So it's a big honor to have you with us, Sarah. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you indeed, and the honor is truly, truly mine. Excellency, Mr. Norbert Goresen, Deputy Special Envoy on Climate Action of Germany, thank you so much for your opening words. You've set the stage for this discussion, and we're of great appreciation to you. Smiljana Nez, who will speak later, the Climate Diplomacy Envoy of Slovenia, we are so grateful for your presence. Representatives from governments, from UN entities, dear representatives from civil society, many of whom we will hear from today, dear colleagues, dear partners, dear friends, it really is my honor to be with you today in Dubai at this particularly urgent event on the sidelines of COP28, which is organized by the United Nations Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And it is in partnership with the German Federal Foreign Office. And today we are here to accelerate momentum, to accelerate both momentum and support for local women's organizations who are standing at the forefront of climate action and at the forefront of peace and security. And I would like to thank the government of Germany for your partnership, for your leadership, for your commitment to the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, for the commitment of Germany to local women's organizations. This makes all the difference. As the host of the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund Global Secretariat, UN Women is particularly proud of what this innovative financing instrument does, what it continues to do to deliver for local women's organizations, including local activists in fragile settings all the way around the world. Today, as we all know, the world is facing unprecedented challenges. An estimated 3.3 billion people are considered highly vulnerable to climate change. And as climate change drives conflict around the world, it poses unique but critical risks to livelihoods, to health and security. It also very much exacerbates gender inequalities in very stark and concrete ways. And as a direct result of climate-related conflicts, women and girls are disproportionately impacted. They are impacted by food insecurity, they're impacted by water insecurity, by sexual and gender-based violence, by forced displacement. They too often have fewer resources to adapt. At the same time, and there is always a but, however, at the same time, women's civil society organizations are at the forefront. They are at the forefront of climate response, of implementing robust mitigation and adaptation measures. They are at the forefront at the community level, serving as the engines of progress, of agency, and of action to peace and security issues that address climate at the nexus. They are actively interpreting and adapting to global challenges in their local contexts in ways that are inclusive, in ways that are tailored, in ways that drive forward unique creative momentum and solutions. And despite being central to the global climate response, the work of local women's organizations is far too often under-resourced, under-recognized, under-supported, and under-leveraged. In fact, a mere 0.2% of all philanthropic giving goes to women's work leading at the climate environment nexus. Additionally, women and girls remain shockingly underrepresented in key decision-making processes related to climate change and resource management. And this in turn results in policies and programs that insufficiently prioritize the needs, the focus, the rights, the priorities of women leaders themselves. This exacerbates existing conflicts. It leads to further inequalities. And that is why we are particularly grateful for the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. As you heard, already is launching today a new funding appeal on climate security. This will accelerate programmatic. It will also accelerate institutional support to women's organizations. Both are important for local women's orgs. These are organizations that work at the forefront of climate action to build a more peaceful, secure, and climate resilient world. Since launching just in 2016, the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund has supported over 1,000 local and grassroots civil society organizations in 43 crisis-affected countries around the world, with women's organizations responding to climate insecurity, to climate injustice. We will hear from a few of them today. We will hear from two amazing environmental activists and women's human rights defenders from Colombia and from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, each bringing with them invaluable experiences and local solutions. We know these local solutions matter. In Colombia, the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund is supporting civil society partners to implement sustainable production systems in rural communities. Another country in Vanuatu, they are supporting local climate activists to establish women-led early warning systems. In a place where the Pacific Ring of Fire is so significant, these women-led early warning systems are critical. In Bangladesh, they are financing women to lead trainings on modern gardening techniques and eco-friendly agricultural practices. Today, I so look forward to hearing from the two environmental activists from Colombia and DRC and hearing from them on their recommendations on how we can support them, how we can understand their work, how we can listen to it, and bring our full hands of support behind it. The launch of this climate security funding appeal has an overall target of $25 million. And we are so grateful for the government of Germany and others to contribute. Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund aims to accelerate financing, aims to rally the international community to invest in the work of women civil society leaders, such as those that are here today. We know that women's full and equal participation is vital for sustaining lasting peace, particularly in escalating climate-related security risks. And to do so, the funding needs that women's organizations have are for this funding to be quality, for it to be flexible, for it to be timely, for it to stand behind women's civil society organizations that are at the front line. Germany's critical support to women-led and to women's rights civil society organizations is yet again and will undoubtedly become instrumental in promoting the leadership and participation of women and girls at the front lines. We have, I think, a responsibility, as I close, to ensure that women are engaging directly those who are affected most by the alarming impacts of climate change, that their voices, their perspectives, their experiences are actively shaping the responses. And so that's why we've come here together today. So on behalf of the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, we really look forward to our continuing partnership, to standing alongside women's civil society organizations, to supporting their agency, to supporting their leadership, to supporting their unlimited and transformative power of women at the front lines. And with this, I thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Hendricks, for your keynote as well. Thank you so much for coming here today. And with that, we dive into our first call to action when we talk about investing in women leadership, in investing in climate security. So with that, the video will be shown, and then I'll meet you on stage in a second.
Climate change is driving conflict and crisis across the globe, exacerbating gender inequalities and posing unique threats to women's livelihoods, health, safety, and security. In addition to bearing the brunt of food and water insecurity, women and girls in every corner of the world are disproportionately impacted by climate-induced forced displacement and conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence.
My home village back in the rural area has been completely washed away. So they have to move inland to a new setting, and they have to adapt to, and even though they're in the new setting, they're still coming to terms with the effects of climate change.
Despite this, it is often women who are rebuilding their communities in the aftermath of climate-related disasters. Women and their local organisations bring vital perspectives and critical experience in their work to responding to the local impacts of the global climate crisis and its gender dimensions.
Las organizaciones de base, las organizaciones populares, las organizaciones de mujeres, vivimos el día a día en los territorios. Sentimos lo que las otras mujeres con las que estamos viven. Entonces, en ese sentido tenemos una conciencia, un sentimiento, y podemos hacer acciones muy concretas y muy reales a las necesidades de las mujeres.
Women on the front lines are working at the forefront of climate security, and they are calling for the world's attention and financial support.
When women come together, lots of things do happen. I mean, the space becomes so powerful when they collaborate, when they share their stories, share their challenges, share their successes. They can mobilize, they can build movement. From then, they're able to make transformative change.
The United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is calling for a global response to support local women's organisations addressing climate-related conflicts and climate injustice in fragile settings around the world. Funding supports local women's organisations in Bangladesh, Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Haiti, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, Palestine, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, and Sudan.
Imagínense ahora uniéndonos, tejiendo juntos que es posible un mundo con justicia de género, un mundo donde todos y todas quepamos, un mundo humanizado, un mundo digno, un mundo con feminismo popular, campesino, familiar, étnico. Podemos hacer muchas cosas y está en manos de mujeres muy valientes, mujeres que han tenido mucho coraje, mujeres que resisten y resisten y los estamos esperando para que continuemos el camino juntos.
WPHF aims to mobilize $25 million by 2025 to support women and girls on the front lines of climate security and climate justice across the globe.
And with these images, it's now time, of course, to dive into the local perspectives when we talk about challenges, opportunities, and good practices of investing in women's leadership in climate security and climate justice. So with me, please come on stage. You are the women leaders from civil society organizations, and we can't wait to hear more about your perspective. So please, Sherifa, Nohora, and Sheena, join me on stage. Sheena, may I ask you to go to the left? Sherifa next to me, and Nohora, bienvenidos. You can go to the center. So now is the time. The stage is on the, okay. Now is the time to switch to your language, as we do have French and Spanish-speaking panelists here. Please use your translation devices if you're in need. Oh. Ça va? Oui, là, oui, tu peux parler français, non, pas de problème. Okay, I'd like to start with a quick introduction before we want to hear more about you. So I hope, is everything working? Great, you can understand me through our perfectly working translators. Thank you so much, by the way. Behind the scenes, there's a lot going on with all these channels, so thank you to the translators. So with us in the center is Nohora Alejandra Higuantar. Bienvenidos. You are the founder of Tejiendo Pensamiento Indigenous Women for the Climate, coming from Colombia. Thank you so much for coming. You are a young indigenous woman from Colombia. You are a biologist by studies, a natural scientist, and you are also a co-leader of the Feminist Action Coalition for Climate Justice of UN Women. You are, as I said, of the organization Tejiendo Pensamiento, the Indigenous Women for Climate, and the mission is the rescue of ancestral knowledge in intergenerational equity to build resilience within communities. So it's all about this muscle of resilience, empowering girls, their allies, to access the resources, but also the networks and the platforms they need when it comes to boosting the activism. You will speak Spanish in a second, but thank you so much. Muchas gracias for being here today. I come to in this quick round of introduction, I come to Sherifa Ayere. Thank you, bienvenue ici en fait. You are an environmental activist and founder of la Coalition des Femmes Leaders pour l'Environnement et le Développement Durable, c'est CFLEDD. You're working there, among others, on protecting and promoting also indigenous and local women's land rights and their participation in climate change response in the beautiful Democratic Republic of Congo, coming all the way from DRC. It's a long way, thank you. You're also one of the co-founders of l'Association des femmes autochtones engagées pour la protection de l'environnement et la lutte contre la pauvreté féminine. And you're leading there on gender, on advocacy for women's involvement and participation in decision-making bodies when it comes, again, to the protection of the ecosystems. And yeah, as I said, thank you so much for coming, and you will speak in French in a second. Last but not least, Sheena is with us. Sheena Anderson, she is the program manager in the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, CFFP, a Berlin-based think tank really driving forward feminist foreign policies internationally, globally. You are a feminist, an intersectional environmentalist, a political scientist. You are leading, as I said, the programs by CFFP on climate justice, anti-racism, and you're also a writer, as you write a lot about intersectional climate justice as an activist. So please give our panel a beautiful round of applause as they're coming from so many different perspectives. I start with you again, Nahora, as we dive into your story, of course, and your work as a woman environmentalist, an activist in the area when it comes to the nexus of climate security and justice in Colombia, which is always not an easy place to fight for the nexus of women's rights within climate security and climate justice. So can you tell us again, what is your active role in designing climate security and climate justice programs from your perspective? How do you design it locally on the ground?
Bueno, Wanampa Actupue, que tengan un bonito amanecer.
Well, a very nice day to you all.
No he preparado nada, así que
I haven't prepared anything specific, so I'm not going to be very diplomatic. I have no document prepared, but I will say that it is a big challenge in Colombia to be an activist or to defend the land and territory due to a great deal of intimidation that most women face when working at the grassroots, particularly when we decry mega projects that are carried out in our territories. Since I was very young, I started to realize how women's rights were violated and how women were harmed, and how the territory itself had been looted, and the women were facing exactly the same situation. And that's when I started working with local authorities and other youth organizations to try and see what could be done in communities, and particularly mine. So this is an organization led by young women under the age of 35, and that started to address issues of women and human rights. And who were we working with? We worked with various institutions. This is continued to be a challenge to address, and it's difficult to decry what's taking place as regards biodiversity and increasing deforestation and the loss of traditional knowledge, as well as loss of water sources, pollution with the use of mercury, and that women have to drink this water, and there is women are affected during their menstrual cycle. There's no responsibility as regards women's health and sexual rights. So this is a challenge. It continues to be so. But we need to act, and we need to change the dialogue with governments, authorities, and organizations. This means that we need to have information, we need to train women to know what they need, that the information, they receive the information, and that institutions themselves can provide a space, and that they be involved in planning so projects may continue in the long term. This is particularly important, that this remains within their areas and that this can be led by women. More important than the funding is the fact of providing women with necessary tools so they can be financially autonomous. And how can we do this? By providing financial literacy, to talk about cybersecurity for women who advocate for rights, as well as to allow the women themselves to generate data by using digital tools which are currently available, so that they can report on the institutions on the work plans.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I mean, there are a lot of keywords we're going to dive into what you've just mentioned in a second. But thank you so much for giving us a little bit of an overview of course, also how difficult your work is and in which vulnerable environments you have to work every day with your sisters, with your networks, with your communities. And you brought up a few questions that I'd like to dive into a bit later, but thank you so much for raising already some balls into the air. Merci. I'd like to come to you, Sherifa, because we are also interested in your story, right? So you're coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, you work as a woman environmentalist activist, and you're working also at the nexus to climate security. What happened to you that you are so passionate about your work, and what helps you and your community on the ground really to drive that nexus forward?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. As I am Sherif Fayed, I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I first worked for the Coalition of Women for Sustainable Development. I'm a member of the Women's Indigenous group, and to fight against poverty. We militate every day for equality, opportunities for both women and men. We work for the effective participation of women in decision-making, in the fight against climate change, and the management of natural resources in general. As you well know, traditional customs limit women, their participation and their decision-making at the local level or even the national level. We are proud, nevertheless, of the women's movement and everything that we have achieved over the past 10 years. And we are the authors of certain laws in the provinces that work for land tenure amongst women. Land and forests go together, and climate change affects the forest and affects peace and security. And we have to give access to women to land so that they can exercise their practices to fight against climate change. Because if women do not have space and opportunities, they will not be able to fight against climate change. And they have a challenge because they're the ones that nourish humanity. And women fight against climate change, and that is our first responsibility and joy. We as women, we have followed up the reform to the end and to change articles and reforms that focus specifically on women's rights as human beings in the national territories. That is our work that we do. I know that the women respond to climate change, as you well know, and the impact of climate change differs from one area to another. The DRC is a large country, and so we have many different provinces and territories that are different from each other, and women have many local practices, and they are traditional practices that they exercise to fight climate change. And we can talk about fertilization of land, the use of straw, mulching, they use waste fertilize the soil and the land in order to increase farming yields, and we feed our families and even humankind. We work on cropping. Instead of going to the mountains, we go to along the banks of the river to fight a drought and fight climate change. We use biological pesticides. We like biological fertilizers instead of chemical fertilizers. We use our own intelligence and we report what happens with chemical pesticides. We use biological resources and traditional practices to use for our crops and harvest. Our practices differ from one territory to another, but we have girls and women who work together, and we have customs. These customs oftentimes confine women and do not enable women. Women are not allowed to speak, and women cannot intervene. They can't make decisions, and others are speaking for them. A woman is like a bird, and they are always afraid that she will fly away and that she will have to get married, and that will prevent her from working. And that is a constraint on women's rights. And women's do not have the right to inherit from their families because traditional customs prevent women from benefiting from inheritances. We have at the local level girls and women who are confined, and we need to advocate for the benefit of local indigenous women. And they say, what can women say? No, we know what we want to say, but they say, no, they have nothing to provide. But as a women's coalition, as a movement, we use strategies of dialogue, strategies of roundtables and dialogue to ensure equitable women's rights. And that is what we are doing. And we have had tangible results and achievements. We are proud of that. There are many women who are working in DRC at the national level that have achieved a great deal. And we are, of course, being prevented with the different languages that are used in our country. And language prevents us from obtaining information sometimes and having access to funding, for example. And because when you see something in English, for example, you can't have access to it because you don't have the time to translate, you don't know the language. And so women have to take advantage of the opportunities that are available. There are other obstacles as well. And the barriers, the language barriers, first of all, and the other barrier is access to funding. We need to help women who are advocating for the fight against climate change, and we need resilient funding. We have project funding. This is transitional, temporary funding, but we need to exercise our participation and to do the tasks that have been assigned to us. And what is our recommendation? First, to give women access to exercise her rights, to be free, to exercise against climate change, and to give her the rights that she has to have as a human being, just like men have. And also land tenure is another important right, because the fight against climate change is exercised in the land, on the soil. And so we need women to have climate funding, and that has to be given by governments, but governments don't give access to women. And there are agencies, for example, international agencies, for example, women can have access and funding, but we can talk about climate change and women. We have to put them together. We have to be informed of what is going on. Women will know how to manage natural resources because women have permanent contact with woods and forests, and we need the effective participation of women in the decision-making for the fight against climate change in real time in order to fight together against climate change. Nothing in my land without me and women. Thank you very
Merci. Merci. Now I have to switch into English. Sorry, I'm mixing the languages. Merci bien. Thank you so much for that list of to-dos and what you also mentioned about the importance to empower the women also on land rights, what Nohora also mentioned, just to name one thing, picking out one thing that you mentioned. And we come into that in a second round. We do have time, we don't have to get through every point at the first round, but thank you so much for sharing your perspective, which is also a very vulnerable perspective, and for being here on the stage to both of you. It's incredible to have you here. Thank you again. Sheena, let's zoom out a little bit. So we had a local example of Colombia. We traveled with our thoughts now to DRC. Let's zoom out and talk about the feminist foreign policy framework, which is now spreading all over the global map if we look on the world map. And maybe you can share with us why you think or how it might be, the feminist foreign policy framework, how it might be a better instrument in promoting these women's locals' rights and in these women's locals' leaderships that we obviously need to fight and to bring climate action forward, but also to empower the nexus between feminist foreign policies and climate justice. How does this framework help us in a way?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll try to add to what my sisters to the left have already said, and I think what was mentioned already on land rights and water is already so central to what feminist foreign policy has to promote. But taking it out, as you said, on a more theoretical level, I think feminist foreign policy is ideal if we implement it in an intersectional, radical, and committed way to really amplify locals women's perspective. I don't like that term actually that much, but I'll get into that later. But because I think climate security has also been mentioned, and climate justice, and I think feminist foreign policy really is ideal to question and challenge traditional understandings of security, because we really try with feminist foreign policy to put marginalized communities' security, and that obviously includes women and local women's security at the front, and to prioritize it over state security, because security is does not only mean to live in peace and in freedom. It also means having access to food, having access to water, having access to land, as was already mentioned, having economic security and having climate security, and a lot of state security that's around militaries, around police, doesn't necessarily guarantee that. So I think by questioning that security understanding, that already helps. Another point is that if implemented in a committed way, I think feminist foreign policy always relies on the knowledge, on local women's knowledge, and on indigenous knowledge and wisdom, because it's not like this is the theory and we go somewhere and explain people what to do. It's really like an exchange and an learning with and from each other. And I think by doing that, we implement it in a way that we do foreign and security policy by and for the people, and I think that's so important. And I mean, the German feminist foreign policy guidelines in Guideline 4 explicitly mention climate diplomacy, which is great. It's an absolute win, and it does acknowledge in that guideline the importance of women's leadership and guidance in climate diplomacy and policy making. However,
there's a big but. I hear it already.
Yeah. However, we really need to make that true, and what that means, and what that can look like, and not like really integrate and include diverse people, diverse women, because obviously women are also not all the same from the beginning. Not have an idea and then integrate people, but really from the beginning, where do we want to go? And a final point I want to make on that. Is I'm not a local woman, I'm a German woman, although I don't look very typical German. But I want to say that specifically that's something that I think Germany and global North governments have to do better, is we are a very diverse country as well. but we don't even manage to protect and include our own minorities in Germany. So how do we really meaningfully engage with local women's perspectives if we can't even appreciate and acknowledge that diversity at home? So all of that, what we want to live on the outside, we also need to mirror on the inside, because if we then bring diverse perspectives together, we can truly acknowledge local women's leadership.
Sheena, we talked about that you didn't like the term of talking about women's leadership perspectives. Or
local women, I meant the term local women. Because
why is it so irritating for you from your perspective? Because everybody, I mean, we talk a lot and we debate about the big frameworks, and I would see it as a big advantage to zoom in to really have a concrete example. But why is it irritating for you?
I think we often specifically in government institutions, we use the term local women, but it's not really clear what is meant by that, and there might be an idea of what that means, and then we approach and act in a certain way, but don't really learn what is local knowledge, how do people operate, what does people's everyday life look like. We just have this idea, maybe, it's not an accusation, it's just, I think from experience also in my everyday work, this idea of what of being more diverse. So we reach out to what we think is a local woman and then try to implement our policies and our idea of how we engage, and not necessarily in a very sustainable and appreciative way. So I think we need to clarify first what we mean by local, and then engage with people, but also ask them what they really mean by that term, and if that's a term they even use themselves. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. I think it's important, as we all somehow are engaged in creating panels or in creating and writing a lot, so we always have to readjust a little bit our languages as well. We talked about feminist foreign policy now, and I'd like to ask Nohora and Sharifa, to you both, because of course feminist foreign policy, some call it a trend now, since 2014. A lot of national governments are creating feminist foreign policies agendas. So there is this wind of change in a way, and I know this term is also quoted here. But does it help you in your work? Because this topic, we are here at the COP, we have a full stage now talking about feminist foreign policy aspects. That's a very new thing, and it couldn't happen 10 years ago or 5 years ago, even then. So does this new platform give you help? En français? Oh, she needs a microphone. Here we go. You okay?
I was saying, you were speaking in English. You asked the question in English and then in French, and so I have to listen.
En français, d'accord. Alors, on a fait...
Okay. We have a feminist policy, foreign policy now. Is this policy, feminist foreign policy, does that help you to do your work locally? Yes. The world feminist foreign policy, it can help us in one way or another, because in our country we have a problem of implementing law, enforcing law. The policy is there, but if it's not if it doesn't materialize and not implemented, if people are not informed, it will not be applicable. And that will not help us in our work if it's not implemented. There's a problem. There's a problem of the enforcement of policies in our country, and that is the effort that we try to do every single day as a women's movement, to focus on everything that has to do with women, whether it's policies, national policies, or international policies. But we know that with the force that we have as women, we will be able to ensure the enforcement of policies at the decision-making level to help women for good security and peace, to fight against the conflicts that affect...
Is increasingly helpful now with feminist foreign policies worldwide on the rise. Is it a topic that you also debate locally?
Yes, it's true. Our country wants to ratify a world policy, but there is a problem of enforcement. They support the policy, but they don't enforce it. Whether it's a feminist policy, we always want to ratify it, but we want the enforcement, and there's a problem of implementation. And that is a problem in our country, but probably it's a world problem as well. But even if it's not enforced, we're always working on ensuring that enforcement, and we're always pushing that, getting rid of those barriers and to go through the problems and solve them. We as a coalition, we install the measures for enforcement to accompany these policies to make them work. And that is a major problem, the implementation, the application of the policy.
Thank you for pushing that again, that message. Nohora, also the question goes out to you that I had. You know, the feminist foreign policy is on the rise worldwide. How does it help you locally for your work?
I believe that feminist policies and from a decolonial approach, it can help grassroots organizations. And that's precisely because we are linked with other women networks globally so as to be able to learn from their practices and experience that have proven to be successful and that can be implemented in other communities. Because this is something that we share globally. Many of us women share, and that these are problems that are global but at a different scale. The important thing about designing policies and policies for women is that women are able to participate in building, planning, and implementation. And this is crucial so that this policy can be implemented and continued locally. This means we need more women in decision-making and taking on public office so that they can check and ensure that this is effectively, fairly, and really implemented. This includes funding, capacity building, training, and intergenerational training. And I'm talking about young girls, because although those that plan policies which are adults, just like is the case in the COPE, those who will actually implement these are the younger people, the generation that follows on from those adults. And that is why it is essential that we are observers of what is being proposed, because this is going to affect us and the younger generations. So the policy requires collective research and investigation with participation where the communities are part of the action of changing actions. That is why they're so essential. So the term feminist in my community, we have not yet worked on that. And yet this is something extremely important, but we have to see how to address this, since feminism is considered a different way, and this is a term that has been imposed. Nevertheless, this is an important tool that all women can use in order to protect rights, not only human rights, the right to territory, the right to health and reproductive health, the right to water. We cannot privatize water. If this is done in our communities, women's bodies will be affected, and we need to put the knowledge of communities, agricultural practice, their calendars, knowledge of plants, since these are used for medicinal purposes, and knowledge of our territories. So this is essential to present this, how the governments will introduce them, and women holding public office can follow up. And we need support networks so that those who defend these rights can work from grassroots levels, and they're not afraid to speak out. We can talk about many things. We can talk here, but if you go back to your country, we cannot talk. Who can guarantee that I can speak up and I may be able to go back to my community and walk peacefully, for having mentioned that there is pollution, that water sources are polluted with mercury, and the women continue drinking this water because governments don't like to talk about very delicate issues which are negotiated here.
Thank you. Sheena, I'd like to come back to you, and then I open the floor to you, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, please give me a hand sign. Give me a second. The microphone is around the corner. Sheena, we also talked about financing. And of course, we need more application. We need more strength and power. We have the networks, but we need the access also. So we tackled a lot of keywords, but at the end, it comes down to money, what we just listened to. Of course, there's this new fund. Now the money is mobilized. Does this help? Of course, probably it's not enough, but how do we ensure that the feminist foreign policies framework are adequately financed, and where do we have to prioritize the finance mechanism and the instruments? Maybe you can give us an insight as an expert for the framework.
Yeah. I mean, that has already been mentioned by Sarah Hendricks also in her keynote, but also by my two colleagues here on stage. I mean, feminist civil society all around the world is chronically underfunded. So obviously that's an issue, and ideally feminist foreign policy will tackle that, but that's only possible if feminist foreign policy itself is funded. So if implemented in a country, we cannot only declare a feminist foreign policy, funding needs to come with it, and the goals that we set with a feminist foreign policy need adequate funding. Then another thing that's already also been mentioned is that typically we operate on project funding. That's not sustainable. If I have a project that runs for half a year or a year, I have to pay my rent, I have to feed a family, I have to live, do everyday work. I cannot do that if I'm always working in precarity. So to really have institutional funding, have government funding, have long-term multiple year funding, that's also unrestricted in a way that it doesn't say, okay, you have to do X, Y, Z to get the funding. We're talking about local women's leadership. People know, women know what they need, what they want. We don't need to tell them with restrictions in a fund, just give them the money. So people and specifically women can operate and use it for them in a meaningful way. I think that's what feminist foreign policy needs to do. I think the fund already is a great initiative, and as it's in the title of this panel also, invest in women. So it's really like invest in women. Just do it and do it all over. Don't do it in a limited way, and trust women and marginalized communities that they know how to use that money. I think another thing, and I mentioned this before, but I want to repeat it here, is to really be open when we give funding that the outcome might be completely different than what we had initially set as a goal. And that's okay. We need flexible funding. It can't be that we already set the goal in the beginning and then at the end something else comes out and we're like, oh, now we can't fund it anymore.
But how far away are we from that? I mean, that is a theory of development, framework and development.
I can give a personal example. I mean, I'm from a global north country. I'm still marginalized, but I am from a global north country. I have passport privilege. I have a fairly paid job. Still, my organization can only afford to be here in week 1. So if I'm already struggling with this, how do we ensure this for local women, for indigenous women, for women in marginalized communities from conflict-ridden areas? If already I, from a global north country, coming from a feminist civil society, can't only afford to be here in week 1. So that's a direct example. I think there's improvement. I feel like COP by every year becomes more and more diverse, whatever we mean by that, but it seems like that. But we need to ensure that we give more sustainable funding to women's organizations, to indigenous organizations, and really invest in local women's leadership.
Please write again a blog article after that COP, because I read your article on the CFFP website from last year's Sharm el-Sheikh. So, you know, this is a kind remember, put it on your reading list, it's definitely worth it. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, for that, I open the floor because we do have 2 more activists here in our audience, and with us from Sudan, and I think this is also crucial what you just mentioned, bring really the local voices, whatever local means, but the voices from Global South countries here on stage. So Tasneem Syed Ahmed is with us. You are a Sudanese climate activist, and you are also a loss and damage negotiator at COP28. What a hot topic in every sense, right? So listening to what we've just heard, all the to-dos and the keywords, what comes to your mind? What is important for you to share with you?
Thank you for presenting. I'm a junior loss and damage negotiator with LDC Group. This is my first year as a negotiator. I've been learning journey. I would, from working in Sudan, I used to work in an organization. We investigate the land rights in Darfur region, and certainly I could say like what we witnessed, that the impacts of climate change are not gender neutral. Women are the most vulnerable to climate change, as they represent 57% of farmers in the country. Even with the increase of militarization in Sudan, like Sudan, we do have conflicts now. A lot of farming and agriculture became on the burden of women. And with the impacts of climate change, there is less rainfall. This affects the livelihood of women. In some areas, they had to walk I think 2 hours coming and going just to get the water. This have health impact. Even in last month we had 2 incidents of girls just died from exhausting in the way. So I think it's really it's seen. We could really see the impacts of climate change on women, and bringing women voice is very crucial, as it's not there on the table, like when you say negotiation or on peace topics. All of these women voices are not heard, and having access to finance and fund that it's flexible to work in such complex situation like Sudan. This I think will be very crucial. Women, and even with we see with the recent conflict that we have more than 400 million displacement in Sudan. We are now the largest country with internal IDPs. I was one of them, and then I had to leave the country. But definitely, women are more impacted, and we even saw it in a way that. Because of the economical impacts of climate change, when you had to cut trees, for example, to get food or to get economical perspective, from selling food. So this is also we are seeing now. And I would say definitely, to get access to climate resilient like funds or like funds that will provide like climate resilience, capacity building, technology transfer to these local farmers. It's very important and crucial. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for also sharing your experiences here, and I hope your loved ones are okay. I mean, thank you so much for sharing your experience here, and we wish you all the best. And please stick around. We have time for conversation later on, but it's a big honor to have you. Also with us is Nazanin Moshiri. You are senior analyst on climate, environment, and conflict with the International Crisis Group. We're also colleagues, so you also worked as a journalist for over 2 decades. So thank you again for being here. But listening to these voices now on to the open questions that are still around, because of course in 90 minutes you cannot find all the answers to all the questions. What is important for you to share from your perspective and from your narrative?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of my research is on the front lines of environmental degradation, climate change and conflict. And it was very interesting in Somalia when I spoke to women who had escaped from Al-Shabaab controlled areas, Al-Shabaab being an Islamist militant group operating in Somalia. They told me that, look, if we just had the drought, we would have been able to cope. But it was a combination of the drought and the tactics of Al-Shabaab that forced them to move. Also, I really want to make this point clear that we often say, women bear the brunt, women are the victims, but actually, women are also part of the solution. And I've seen this a lot in water diplomacy, around resource-based conflict. When women and youth are involved, those kinds of projects are going to be more sustainable and more likely to succeed. Also, I want to make a point here, because this is what I do, this is my bread and butter, looking at climate change, environment and conflict. We don't say that climate change drives conflict. There are indirect links. So what climate change does is exacerbate pre-existing tensions and conflicts that have existed in those countries for many, many years. So for example, Japan is very at risk from climate change, but it has the capacity and the governance to cope with these issues. So we have to also focus on local governance and capacity and corruption as well is really, really important. So I think it's important to sort of look at this, but also data is crucial as well, and we haven't focused enough on this. I was at an event last night with somebody from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they have a lot of money to spend, and they want to spend it on women's organizations and groups, but they said we can't spend the money without data. Storytelling is important, of course, but we need disaggregated data. We need to understand the dynamics and situation before we spend our money.
Thank you so much, Nazanin. I have to stop here, but thank you so much for bringing your perspective again and for bringing new questions also that we need to cover next time when we see each other again. We need to talk about that as well. I'd like to welcome now on stage, because we have to close that event, unfortunately. I would love to go on with you for another at least 3 hours, as we have to cover more here. Ambassador Smiljana Knez is with us. She is the climate diplomacy envoy from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. And I warmly welcome you now on stage for closing remarks. And maybe you can also share your thoughts. What's important for you now to work on when you're listening to these voices, and what is the priority that you're taking home with? Thank you. Please give a round of applause to our panelists before we start. No, we can stay. Savali. Allo, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And I really sincerely thank Germany and the UNWPHF for inviting us to this important and timely event. Although we have just heard about the link between climate change and peace, and this link, I think, is rather well evidenced already, and at the same time, or even more, applies to our knowledge of the linkage between gender equality and peace and security, but we still do not know enough about the women, peace and security, and climate, peace and security linkages and interdependence. And today's event, of course, is particularly helpful as it contributes to the understanding of the gender dimension of climate-related security risks. And I think the discussion leads us towards unlocking further potentials in all three areas: peace and security, WPS, and climate resilience. In Slovenia, we focus on capacity building. Our Peace Operation Training Center conducts a course on gender equality and gender mainstreaming in peace operations and missions for years already, and has earlier this year started also with the climate peace and security program, with emphasis on women as well. We advocate for meaningful participation of women in environmental peace-building efforts and in water governance. Women, we strongly believe, are peace agents for food security as well. We support the work of the Global Network of Women in Water Diplomacy. The network serves as guidance on mainstreaming gender equality in transboundary mechanisms. Such cross-border networks can enable mutual learning and mentorship and create a safe space to discuss sensitive issues and gain exposure to the diverse roles and functions needed in transboundary water negotiations and management. As a newly elected non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, my country will prioritize both women, peace and security and climate peace and security agendas. When it comes to women, peace and security, we will focus on full, equal and meaningful participation of women in peace and security, and on addressing conflict-related sexual violence. We have already announced intention to join the shared commitments on women, peace and security, but we will also join share pledges on climate peace and security. We commend Germany for its leading role both on climate security as well as on gender-related issues. We have joined Climate for Peace project with two projects, already mentioned Peace Operation Training Program and a Development Cooperation Program project in South Darfur, led by our Institute Circle. Let me just shortly explain why this project, describe this project, and I personally believe it covers different aspects of what we have discussed today or what we have heard from our panel. In response to acute food and water insecurity, our civil society partners introduce sustainable agriculture practices and sustainable access to safe drinking water. As they establish cooperatives and saving schemes for local communities, they use the entry points for social cohesion among the displaced, refugee and host populations through awareness-raising campaigns against sexual and gender-based violence. They promote coexistence through strengthening conflict management capacity of community management committees. We can see that this project has a special focus on women. Slovenia is a proud partner of WPHF and has in 2023 earmarked 170,000 euros, 25,000 specifically for climate security. The effort of the fund to strengthen women's voice in prevention of and response to conflicts and crises, including in climate security, is at the heart of work for peaceful, just and stable societies and international environment. And I was also encouraged to say a couple of words on what it is that we expect from COP28. And let me assure you that we will play active role and much attention to rights-based approach We will advocate for women's rights and the right to clean, healthy, sustainable environment to be mainstreamed throughout the final documents. Women's rights are human rights, and human rights are an integral part of climate justice. So women's rights have been our priority in our foreign policy for decades now, but under the current government, we pursue also a feminist foreign policy. So for me personally, it was interesting also to listen to the definition, because, you know, being so active for decades in gender issues, it is a question how we can upgrade it into the more, I don't know, true feminist foreign policy. So again, thank you from my heart for inviting us, for having us here, and with this, I thank you for your attention.
Ambassador Knes, thank you so much. And as the last speaker, I welcome now Ambassador Melan Verver now on stage. He is the Executive Director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security of the United States of America, and she most recently served as the first US Ambassador for Global Women's Issue, a position which she was nominated by President Obama in 2009. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Katie, and a salute to our extraordinary soldiers, first responders doing the hard work in the field. You've already heard their compelling, powerful examples of why investing in grassroots, women-led climate solutions is a tremendously important investment. Let me add to what you've heard. Rigorous evidence-based case research is indispensable for implementing effective climate action. We at Georgetown University's Institute for Women, Peace and Security last month released the 4th edition of the Women, Peace and Security Index. It is one of the most comprehensive measures of women's well-being. Why do I say that? Because it looks at 3 dimensions of women's well-being, not just inclusion, but also justice and security. And we rank 177 countries. And the countries at the bottom, where women are not doing well, are the countries mired in conflict, mired in climate problems, fragile, and unstable. So the correlation is critically important. In other words, in nations where the status of women is good, those nations are more peaceful, democratic, and better prepared to adapt to the impacts of climate change. We just completed a study, a copy of which I have with me, and you can pick up a few more. And what this study does is show the gender climate security nexus with Women, Peace and Security Index. It measures women's status as captured in the index with 3 indices relating to climate. One on climate preparedness, one on resilience, and one on environmental performance. And what it finds is that where women were doing well, they were best prepared to respond to climate changes. These findings yield critical policy and programmatic implications. Local women leaders must be included in decision-making to ensure that climate and security interventions are informed and aligned with local conditions. We need to recognize that gender, climate, and security are interconnected issues. Progress in one area leads to advancements in the other 2 areas. This means we must mainstream gender transformative goals with climate change, security, adaptation, and mitigation policies. It also means that the gender dimensions of security and climate issues should be prioritized and integrated into security and climate change policy, as well as into peace building. And we need to move beyond saying all the time something that is absolutely true, that women are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change. And we really, really must put a focus instead on the vital need to incorporate women's meaningful participation in climate action. Women are problem solvers. Their role is absolutely critical. If serious decisions on climate consideration are made in a gender-blind approach, climate adaptation and mitigation will be weakened because women's active engagement in both will not be there. And gender-differentiated knowledge of resource management can enhance local and adaptive capacities, just as the role of women in peace building, at peace tables, contributes to sustainable peace, and what the studies show, a 35% increase in agreements lasting longer than 5 years when so many peace agreements fail, when women can bring the issues to the table that matter to sustainable peace. So we need to see the same thing happening in terms of women's climate participation. This means why we're all here. This must bring about the kind of change we want to see and that we're looking forward to engaging in. This is a moment of growing environmental crises, which you've heard, conflict and fragility. It can also be a moment of opportunity if we invest in the vital force that women's leadership and organizations at the local level represent for peace building and climate solutions. Investment in women's participation are investments in climate change preparedness and response. Yet, as you've heard, the agents of change are not resourced as they should be. So we must act on the evidence, and we must bring greater support to those climate responders on the front lines, like our friends who are here on the stage today. The UN Peace and Humanitarian Fund does critical work, and they must have the resources to continue that work, as well as to build on the exceptional new commitment from the government of Germany to add to the fund greater support to the women who are so active as the climate change makers on the ground. It is timely. It will bring greater return on investment in climate. So together, let's go forward. Let's be ambitious, as you've seen on the screen, and let's really make a difference as we leave here today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mela and Veve. Thank you so much for joining us, of course, today, and for sharing your thoughts also with us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming, for making the time. Again, thank you for sharing your voices. Take that energy of the room with you. You will need it in all the consultations and the discussions, and we are with you. And ladies and gentlemen, join us again for the next program. We're going to have a lot of topics here during the day. You're always welcome here at the German Climate Pavilion. Come by, say hi, and then we see each other very soon. Thank you so much for your attention and for your time. Thank you.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.